We can remember the letter of St. James. Among the many letters that we have in the New Testament, we have all the body of letters from St. Paul, and they are much more focused on faith. Faith is what saves us, and we know all the big discussion that St. Paul had with the Christians in order to tell them, now uh, with Jesus Christ, it's simply believing in Jesus Christ that saves us, and it's not about circumcision or all the practices that the Jew used to have. And with James in the New Testament, we have some kind of rebalancing, explaining also that deeds have a lot of meaning, and it's certainly not an opposition, but it's just expressing, and it's very strong in St. James that basically we believe. When we say we believe, we need also to act. So it's just pointing that to us, and I think it's very. That's the point of the letter of St. James. Uh, the second remark I would like to do on uh, this letter, this little piece, um, it looks like something concerning each of us, but in individual. We need to take care of our brother and our sister. But we can remember just the precedent, the previous chapter of the letter. There is something about some kind of scandal and the fact that there shouldn't be any division in the community. There shouldn't be class division. There shouldn't be social division in the church. So I just say that in order always to remind us that when in the letter of St. James, when it's we talk about charity and the love and the justice we need to have. It's not simply a one-to-one issue. It's not simply an interpersonal issue. Of course, it's an interpersonal issue. Suppose a brother or sister without clothes and daily food, we need to take care of them. But it's also more global as a collective things. And I think we are very much aware of that. I mean, it's never simply taking care individually to a person, but it's also creating the conditions that injustice is not coming. So that's the second idea I wanted to also to point, because the passage that we have is very short, so we need to have the whole thing in mind. And the third thing, just to connect, the connection is well established with the teaching of the words of Pope Francis. But just to remind us, we're in this year of the mercy. Of course, mercy in Latin and in most of Latin languages, misericordia, misericorde, which is maybe expressed differently than the English word. I mean, it's about the heart, cordia, and misery, the misery, the suffering, the misery of people. So it's the idea that with mercy, we just connect, we open our heart, we let our heart being touched by the misery of others, of the world. And the first to do that, of course, is God. So, so we're in this whole dynamism of mercy during this year. And simply, once again, to point this idea, misericordia, mercy, there is a lot of connection with forgiveness. And that's something that in other speeches the Pope has focused a lot on it. But the Pope is also very keen in always highlighting that it's about having our sins forgiven, having God uplifting us, but it's connected also to deeds. And there is this expression that is very traditional in the church about the work of mercies, and there's a long list of works that should be done. But I think for the Pope, it's really the idea to connect, saying, we are meditating on mercy and trying to be more aware how much God is loving us and how much we must love the others. But connecting with the work of mercy, immediately it takes a more also social dimension, simply personal, me with God, or interpersonal, but social. And so I think that's the idea. The last little remark I will do is more technical remark, but the last sentence, he who does not live to serve does not serve to live. It's a bit weird in English. I think it's because the saying is a Spanish saying. So in Spanish it makes sense. It's I found it. Yeah. It's quien no vive para servir no sirve para vivir, and it works well in Spanish, not so well in English. But the basic idea is really that those who do not live to serve, basically, it makes life a bit useless.
I'd like to highlight an expression. It is quite interesting, I think. It is saying that a person can be merciful or not merciful. It's a style of life. I choose to be merciful or I choose not to be merciful. Well, it is quite enigmatic, I think, this expression, because it suggests to mean that to be mercy and to have mercy, it is in fact something that is very much specific. To entertain mercy, this means something that is practical, very much practical and very much specific. And you don't have much choice. Either you have mercy or not. So you have to decide. And this means that mercy is indeed not a matter that is on a level of abstractness. A second comment or a second remark, it is connected to the explanation of Gregoire. If you'd like to entertain mercy, you cannot do that if you are alone. Gregoire has highlighted the significance of living in a community. It is indeed very much important. If you'd like to entertain mercy, you can do that if you are a member of a community. And without community, it is not possible not just to entertain mercy, but even I think that you cannot exercise your religious faith, your belief, if you are just alone. You need society, you need company, and also you can find God through these personal relations. And thirdly, I'd like to highlight, let me have a third remark. That concerns the moment of facing poverty. It is not surprising, of course, it comes from the earlier verses and the earlier accent that is made by the Pope, because if entertain mercy is something that is practical very much and specific very much, this also means that you cannot avoid facing the structural problem of the current world. So the structural vice, and this is the problem of poverty. And although it is not highlighted by this extract, but a little bit later in the same text of the Pope, you can find the expression, I think is very important to pick it up. This is facing the poverty produced by the culture of well-being. It is a very radical statement. And I think it is very plainly spoken that poverty is not by chance, it is something that is produced by the culture of well-being. So probably this sentence means that there is structural conflict between the southern and the northern part of the world, and we are responsible for taking care about this problem, this relationship. And if we are part of a culture of well-being, we have responsibility for taking care about the poor. So you cannot avoid taking a decision even in that respect.
And in sometimes situation seems quite open, giving the possibility to be merciful, and sometimes that can be harder situation where you can feel like with so many constraints that it's not easy to find a way to be merciful. And so I like this idea of style, this idea of human style to be merciful, but at the same time, is it possible to have this human style in certain situations that you don't really see how to implement this attitude in concrete situations?
I am also impressed by the style of life, because mercy is not a negotiation, is not something for which we can have compromise. We are in, as I can read in the text, we are in or we are out. We are in the life or we are out the life. And this, for me, it's a very strong interpellation.
I just want to add the requirement for mercy. It's very difficult to choose and to decide to live in this style of life.
I choose to be merciful, or I choose not to be merciful. It is enigmatic. It is a puzzle. Already I mentioned. It is a puzzle because this sentence or this expression, it may have several connotations, several meanings. First, of course, it is clear that this is a command. This is a religious and ethical command. Be merciful. If you are not merciful, you are not preferring what is good. So it is dictated by your heart and by your belief that you should be merciful. You should be merciful. And it is another aspect or another side of the same coin, how to be merciful. But this is a second question. And it is a matter of practicalities. So it is a very practical issue. If you entertain mercy or not, it is a very practical issue. And in that respect, even it can happen that you have to conclude compromises and you have to negotiate and you have to look for the possibilities or for the limits of your deeds, of your action, because sometimes you have room for action, sometimes not. So I would like to distinguish these two layers of the same term.
I feel this call to enter to a merciful style of life, like conversion. It means something rather deep in the heart, and with the risk that we can imagine that we are good people. And so the second message is that if we don't want to make illusions about ourselves, there is one way to check is, are we doing something concrete? And the first message, it makes me think to a personal member I have interviewed, and you can see the interview on the website, is Amanda from Malaysia, and she's a lawyer, and she says the way for me to try to keep this in mind is I decided to travel in my city only with public transportation, or with also ordinary people. Although it's not really not a good thing when you are a lawyer, because if you are a lawyer, if you have no car, it shows that you are not a good lawyer. But instead of that, she decided to keep this way of transport in order to remain among the people and to be able still to hear what's going on with the Pope for the people. And for me, it's an example of how to answer to the first message, this call to conversion. Maybe one way is not to lose the link with the poor people.
When I read this text, I wrote some question about my one life, and I remember what I do this year. It's a kind of witness, I say, témoignage, witness. I realize that it's very difficult to live and to have mercy. It's very important for me to change, to share with you, because I see things in different way. But the word, it's very difficult. I have the impression that we have no time to think what happened just near. We have no time to think. So you are obliged to continue to go away to follow quickly, and you have time to stay and to mind. But I think I read again this text for me.
Yeah. I think that is a very strong text. If we see it, maybe you saw the complete version of the text, the Pope text, and really he shake us a little bit about this point, because as Christians we have a position in saying that because we are believers, it's already done, this work. But is for me in this case, I will give my feedbacks just because I feel the temptation. So I think that the sentence that is very clear, that for me to touch my heart, they say, mercy has eyes to see, ears to listen, hands to resolve. So it's something clear. It's like if you are Christian, normally we say we see the injustice, we see the poorest, we see the people suffering, and probably we read a lot and we make dialogues about the situation of this world, and we hear a lot of things. But the hands to resolve, God give us also that hands, and to do something. And it's something that sometimes, like Christians, we forget. And this text is remember us that the hands are there for something. It's not for nothing or just for coincidence. You see. So in this case, I feel that the church and the God itself, a long time, is calling us to do something, to have actions. And now, like Giselle said, is a moment to do this review of myself, my year maybe, or my daily life, how I'm doing this work, how merciful I am. And sometimes the evaluation could not be so nice, you see. So it's a point to some very strong analysis of ourselves, you see.
The question of what to do in your personal life and what testimony you can take and on what values in your personal life, it depends, of course, on your very specific conditions. And the answer depends on my background. And I'd like to mention about that I'm deeply involved in civil movements in my country. So because a considerable time of my life I spend on taking part in these civil movements, therefore, of course, for me, maybe the most important point of message of this text, it is not to set aside social responsibility. This is why I highlighted this sentence that facing poverty that is produced by the culture of well-being, because in that respect we have to understand very well and must not be mistaken that the message, the text is very much radical. It is very much radical. You have to commit to the matter of the poor. And in that respect, indeed, there is no compromise, whether you are for the poor or not. And if you are for the poor, then the question is, of course, what is your personal responsibility for that, to try to remove poverty and misery, including social misery. So therefore, also the question will be raised that what about structural inequalities in our current world, and what to do with these inequalities? Can you do in person anything for that, or simply you will accept what it is, misery and injustice and inequalities? And in that respect, for the Christians, there is a very important concept, and this is why I suggested in my preliminary notes that maybe it is interesting to deal a little bit or to think it over a little bit. What about the concept of structural vice? And if you can remember my preliminary notes, you will see that there are two quotations I highlighted, and the two quotations are in conflict with each other. The first quotation on structural sin is from John Paul II, and the second one is from the liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez. And indeed, there is apparently there is conflict between the two statements, because you have to find a place for the concept of structural vice between the two extremes of reductionism, of anthropological individualism, as it is said by John Paul II, and deterministic structuralism. So if you look at John Paul II, he emphasizes that structural vice, it is something that is individual and that is personal. But if you look at the text of Gutierrez, then you will meet the so-called oppressive structures. So there are oppressive structures because there are social schemes, social structures of slavery, conflicts, of alienation, of injustice and exploitation. I think it's not easy to reconcile the two aspects or the two thoughts with each other. But I think that because we know already a little bit Pope Francis, uh, at least we can conclude that he is not far from the thesis of Gustavo Gutierrez, that there should exist oppressive structures, there should exist structural inequalities. And if this is the case, we have to do something with that. It is also our personal responsibility if these structures will be reproduced as they are, or we can do something in order to ease sufferings and the problems of the poor. Such a text makes challenges to us, to our personal life, and my personal response, my personal answer is that I try to take part in social problems and feel responsibility for that. But I do not expect other friends or persons who are close to me that they have to do the same. So it is just it is my life experience. In my life, these problems are in the very center of my life.
Is it necessary to go outside the place where we have our professional life, for example, to find opportunities to give an answer to this call, this radical call of the Pope Francis?
I think what you just said, Philippe, is very much in the line, of course, of what Pope Francis says when he calls the whole church to go to the boundaries, to the frontiers. And then we have to ask ourselves, where are those frontiers, those frontiers, those boundaries that we have to reach? Because maybe that could be by staying where we work, but looking in a different way what we do. Sometimes we think that I'm working in I don't know, in a corporation, in a university, and of course I should do more social work or be a volunteer or whatever. And at some moment we need that in order to open our eyes. And sometimes we are also asked simply to stay where we are, but to look at the things we usually do not see. You can be in a university as a professor and never pay attention to the fact that the people who are there to work, maybe some of them are migrants with undocumented or whatever. I mean, sometimes when you open the eyes, yeah. So that's what I was thinking. But definitely this question of what you said. I mean, the call to move and to go somewhere else. There is something that the whole discussion is leading to that. And the other remark I wanted to also to point to highlight is everything we've said so far. There is a strong call about seeing and hearing. Seeing and hearing. And what do we see? What do we hear? And what are the conditions we are putting in order to see and to hear? And that's also where I hear. Giselle spoke a bit about there is also a question of time. We need time, and you very often live in life where we do not take time. And Pope Francis will say time is superior. I mean, it's superior is higher than space. Le temps est supérieur à l'espace. There is, at other moments you also manage. Yeah, if I take public transportation, I do not see the same thing as if I take my own car. If I travel by bus, I do not see the same thing if I travel by plane. There is all the conditions that we are putting in order to I mean, that will vary. A lot of things will have a huge impact on what we see and what we hear. and the call is also here.
For me, this text has a very good resonance in my professional life too, because I work as a manager in a very competitive world, and at the first impression, mercy is totally opposite from the objectives I can have in my work. What is my work? Is to make money for my company. It's to obtain the best efficiency from collaborators. How can I fulfill my objectives, but in a Christian way, and um, having mercy in the center of my life and my action. And it's a question I have no really answer at the moment, and it is a long time I am looking for an answer, but I think it's a way I will have during all my professional life. But and each, I think at each moment when I have a decision to take, I have to put mercy in the balance, in fact.
Grégoire was mentioning about the frontiers in our life, how to identify frontiers in our personal life. And Luc is mentioning about a balance that we have to look for, that we have to take. Yes, I think that in our everyday life, of course, we all have professions. And because we are professionals, we are expected to behave ourselves as professionals in professional matters. And this means that you have to honor, you have to respect the professional regulations and so on, because you're expected to make as much money as possible. And that's fine. To be efficient, it is fine, no problem. If you are a professional, then you have to follow the professional regulations and all the professional laws. But of course, if you are a Christian as well, and first, of course, you're a Christian, we must not be satisfied just with the respect of professional regulations. We have to go a little bit further. And in that respect, it is the question, where are the frontiers? Where are the frontiers of the room of actions? Where are the frontiers of responsibility, the frontiers of good feelings or bad feelings, the frontiers of being merciful or lethargic? And coming back to the message of Pope Francis, as mentioned, it is very much radical. It is a very strong call, a personal call to us. And this means that you also are expected to be radical in your commitments. Because it is not enough just to be between the two, between what is good and what is bad, but you have to decide. And usually in the everyday life, there is no conflict between the two layers of your responsibility. So your professional life and your religious life. But sometimes you cannot avoid entering into conflicts. And then, of course, it's a question if you can hear the word of God or not. And this, that you should be radical, this means, of course, that you cannot avoid conflicts. And how to work, how to deal with this conflict. Because on the one hand, yes, if I'm, sometimes I have to be confronted with certain values coming from the outward society. But if I'm in conflict, then I'm not able to look for solutions, because solutions come from compromises and from alliances. So, in a certain aspect, yes, there are no compromises, because you decide for the good or not. In that respect, there is no compromise. But if you like to realize this value in your practical life, always you are full of compromises. And I think it is difficult also to strike a balance between these two things. So not just to strike a balance between professions and your Christian belief, but also to find a balance between this command, which is indeed a command that is addressed to Christians, and the realization of this command in your personal life.
Something like, what conditions do we create in order to be able to develop our spirit of mercy? And this is something personal in my life. Of course, I cannot give immediate answer, but commitment to a little bit more open eyes to the situation that are far from me, because maybe I don't want to see them. And this same idea is also available for the movement. What are our boundaries? What are the place where we are not and we don't want to be, or the place where we would be ready to take the risk to be more open the eyes, hear more, in order to be more merciful. This is for me the concrete conditions to create in order to make this change in the heart.
I think that there is another issue inherent in this text that is worth discussing. So the question is, it is clear of how to meet this very strong call, which is very specific and very radical. This is what we are discussing now. And in that respect, there is another kind of distinction as well that is maybe worth mentioning about. This is what is your Christian life if you look for these frontiers in your personal life? Because either you can be supported just by religious dogmatics, or to meet the call that comes from this text, you have to be ethical. Your belief is now established on ethics. And this is why in my preliminary notes, I highlighted also this topic, which is an extract, if you can remember, from Joseph Moing, a Jesuit, as you know, a very famous Jesuit.
French.
And Joseph Moing introduces, or has introduced, the double terms of, on the one hand, un code religieux dans l'Évangile, on the other hand, une pratique humaniste. And this is two very different things. This means that you can be religious, you can follow, you can entertain your belief, which is either based on religious dogmatics, that's fine, no problem. But there is another kind, another quality of being religious. This is your belief that is established on ethics, une pratique humaniste. In that respect, the text is a challenge, because it is a call to follow not just religious dogmatics, but also to be ethical. It would be interesting to think it over of how to continue, because now we have started phone conversation. Yeah. This is good. But there should be a second step as well.
Yeah.
And this is what is really difficult, because it is easy to start conversation, but it is not as much easy to continue conversation. So we have to think it over from the very special aspect of the today's phone call, of how, what is the basics we have received from this phone call, and what about the foundations we can establish the future calls on.
Merci seems to me like on the end point of credibility of my faith.
The thing that came to my mind with everything we said is just in other part of the gospel it said, be merciful as your Father is merciful. In one of the, it's in Matthew or in Luke, I don't remember. And thinking of that, I was just brought back, because it seems so huge, this idea of mercy, and at the same time we open also a lot of doors. So maybe we need to just come back. What could it mean to be merciful as our Father is merciful? How do we know how our Father is merciful? Basically, it's contemplating how Jesus is doing, and thinking of Jesus with Lazarus, Jesus with the Samaritan woman, Jesus with Bartimaeus, Jesus with Peter, all those encounters, and Jesus with the crowds, because it's not simply person. And that's, I was just thinking, I will go back in my prayer to this and to my meditation. With all the openings that we had on mercy, that seemed completely daunting, but maybe focusing also my gaze on Jesus, I will find again that it's possible. Whereas maybe staying at the theoretical level, it seems completely impossible.